Greetings. My name is Shravani Bhattacharyya and I work for the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences in Assam Downtown University. Today's topic of lecture is Trauma Screening Questionnaire. What is trauma? It is a damage to the mind that occurs as a result of a distressing event. There is so much overwhelming amount of stress that it becomes really difficult for one to cope up with it, and also they one is not able to handle the overwhelming emotions that comes with that experience. Trauma can result from a single distressing event, or it can occur from many events of being overwhelmed that builds up through the weeks, years, or even decades. A trauma which is caused by an event or events, it never disappears, but it stays in our subconscious and unconscious. And it could eventually, if not addressed, lead to serious long term negative consequences. Trauma differs between individuals according to their subjective experience, which is very important for us to understand, is because not all people who experience a potentially traumatic event will actually become psychologically traumatized. It could be a differences in the coping abilities, or it could be a differences in the positive psychological resources such as resilience or the willingness of the people to find the meaning in life after the event has occurred. So, all of this makes a difference, and not all people exposed to the same traumatic event can develop post traumatic stress disorder. However, it is possible for some people to develop PTSD after being exposed to a major traumatic event, and this discrepancy in risk rate can be attributed to protective factors that some individuals can have in coping with others. Post traumatic stress disorder, according to the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual 5th edition, PTSD is essentially characterized by the development of certain symptoms following an exposure to a traumatic event. The experience of such symptoms can manifest differently for individuals. Some can experience fear based emotional and behavioral symptoms, but others can experience dysphoric mood states, state of confusion of many moods, and some individuals can develop arousal, reactive externalizing symptoms where they externalize their emotions in destructive ways, while others primarily experience dissociative symptoms. It is also possible for the individual to have a combination of all of these symptoms and not just one. The diagnostic criteria of PTSD. The following criteria, as applied to adults, adolescents, and children older than 6 years, has been outlined in the DSM. So it has to be met for a particular PTSD diagnosis to be met. The individual exposed to actual or threatened death, serious injury, sexual violence in at least one of the following ways. He or she was the victim, he or she would have witnessed in person the event as it happened to others. The individual learned that the traumatic event happened to a close member or family friend. When it comes to actual or threatened death of a closed family members or friends, the event must have occurred violently or accidentally. He or she experienced several exposures to the harsh realities and details of the traumatic exposure. The individual's experiences in at least one of the following intrusion symptoms associated with the traumatic event, beginning after the traumatic event has occurred. Recurrent and involuntary distressing memories of the traumatic event that intrude his or her mind. It can manifest differently for children and adults. For children older than 6 years, Repetitive play or games can involve themes or traumatic events that they experienced. Recurrent distressing dreams involving the traumatic event. In children, it can simply have scary dreams without related or recognizable content. Dissociative reactions, such as flashbacks, where the individual feels threatened, acts as if the traumatic event is occurring all over again. Intense or prolonged psychological distress when exposed to cues that symbolize or resemble the traumatic event. Strong physiological reactions to the above mentioned symptoms. And so on. There are persistent and negative beliefs and expectations that can come with it. And there is also diminished interest, involvement in significant activities, feelings of detachment from others, a persistent inability to experience positive emotions like happiness, love, fulfillment. There could also be angry outbursts, as I mentioned, the previously externalizing reactions, so it could be expressed verbally or physically towards other people or objects. Hypervigilance, always checking the environment for source of threats, even though there could not be any at that particular circumstances. I will be sharing the PowerPoint presentation with you so that you can have a detailed understanding of the features of post traumatic stress disorder. So now we move on to the trauma screening questionnaire. The trauma screening questionnaire, abbreviated as TSQ, is a questionnaire that was being constructed by Brevin in 2002, and it measures post-traumatic stress disorder. It screens out the people who may be experiencing symptoms of PTSD. So it is basically a 10-item symptom screen that was designed for survivors of all types of traumatic stress, not just sexual abuse, but physical abuse, verbal abuse, uh, s- uh, sexual, many violent abuse, etc. So it has TSQ is based on the items from the PTSD symptom scale self report and has five re experiencing items and five arousal items. So it asks you if you're experiencing the items again, and it has five items that could induce arousal in you. The respondents are asked to score those items that they have experienced at least twice, that is, two times in the past 1 week. Brevin considered the screen to be positive, that is, the person to have a post traumatic stress disorder, when at least six items were said to be yes or scored as positive. So, authors recommend that screening should be conducted 3 to 4 weeks post trauma in order to allow for normal recovery processes to take place. It is highly advisable not to administer the screening tool just after the event has occurred, but after 3 to 4 weeks post the event, so that the patient really understands that whether they are able to cope up with it or the event that has occurred to them is experiencing great distress in personal, occupational, and social functioning. So, as I mentioned, I have written this in bold once again, is that the TSQ has to be offered 3 to 4 weeks post trauma to allow the time for normal recovery processes to take place. If by the end of 3 to 4 weeks the individual has experienced six or more of the symptoms and says yes and has yes answers in the past 1 week, then a referral to a behavioral health practitioner is indicated. So, this is the verbatim instructions that you have to give to the client after taking the demographic information. If you have recently been exposed to a potentially traumatic event, here is a tool that may help you to identify whether or not you should seek additional help in recovering from its effects. So you can either answer in yes or no format. So some of the questions or items in the test is upsetting thoughts or memories about the event that have come into your mind against your will in the past 1 week. So if you're experiencing the symptoms, you would say yes. If you're not, no. Bodily reactions such as fast heartbeat, stomach churning. If yes, you would put a tick in the yes column. If no, in the no. Irritability or outbursts of anger. Scoring is simple for this questionnaire is you have to count the total number of yes responses and the total number of no responses. If the total number of yes responses are 6 and above 6, then it is highly recommended that you refer the client to a clinical psychologist or psychiatrist for further intensive psychotherapy sessions, and also appropriate drugs have to be prescribed to the client to heal completely. In the results section, you would be putting down yes response column, no response, and interpretation. So the total amount of yes, total amount of no, and then the interpretation whether the person qualifies for the criteria of experiencing intense traumatic experiences, then you would be referring the client to the psychiatrist. In the interpretation, you would include the client's demographic information, what the SQ really is, what it measures, the explanation of the scores that the client has obtained, and the interpretation of it. And always remember that you have to support your interpretation with the data that you gather during the case history taking sessions in order to understand the client's chief concerns better. And based on the picture that you get after triangulating all of this data, you would be devising your recommendations for the treatment and also stating about the recovery rates of for the client. What are the resources the client individually has? What are the resources that he or she can get from the community? What are the resources that she can get from the primary caregivers? And based on it, write your prognosis, short term and long term. In the conclusion, a short description of the scores that the client has obtained, interpretation of the nature of the trauma the client is experiencing currently. These are the links that you can go back and gather more information on the trauma screening questionnaire. This was all for today's class. Thank you so much for patiently listening. I hope you have a good day ahead.